What is up, guys? Welcome to Garage 23, and this is the current headache I got to deal with. I wasn't even going to make a video on this because it's mostly wiring and it's like impossible to make wiring entertaining, but we got it running, we're almost done, and our buddy Francisco posted this on the Facebook group and everybody's got questions, so we figured might as well just do a video on it to like explain all the components and how it works and stuff. First of all, this is a 2002 6-speed Nissan Maxima, commonly referred to as a 5.5 gen, and these do come with a 3.5 DE engine already, but they have an ECU that's not commonly tunable. So it's this guy right here. I believe Nisformance and I guess admin can tune this. The UPREV ECU is just better because it's more commonly used and literally anybody can tune that. It also has more functionality because you have more control over the throttle body. You could do like launch control and anti-lag, stuff like that. And you could also have map switching. It's better to try and switch to that ECU, but for whatever reason, everyone said that this wasn't possible, but we did that swap in our Altima. It's also running on a 350Z ECU with an Altima harness. So those are the main components that you need. It needs to be an Altima 3.5 harness from 2005 or 2006. And then the ECU, I guess any UPREV style ECU should work, but we've been using 350Z ECUs because they're just the easiest to find, especially manual ones. So those two things, and then if you want your gauges to work, you need to find a gauge cluster from a Sentra. I was gonna say Spec V, but I don't think it has to be a Spec V. This one is a Spec V cluster, but I think it just has to be from 2004 to 2006 Sentra. It like almost bolts right in, like it is ridiculous. Look, I'll just show you guys. So I need to get this cluster out of here. So this cluster is what you need. And the factory cluster from the Maxima is this guy. Very similar, very suspicious. Almost freaking identical. I got super excited when I saw this because I was like, you're telling me this plugs right in? And it does plug right in. But in common Nissan fashion, every goddamn wire is different. Every single freaking one. So you gotta repin the entire thing, which is bullcrap, because it's literally the same connector. Which, it helps a little, I guess, because you don't have to do any soldering. There's a little soldering. But for the most part, you just repin the wires in the connector, and then that's how you get it to work. But yeah, I was so pissed when I found out. Like, I started like comparing the pinouts in the two service manuals, and like I'm like, are you kidding me? Every single wire is different. So, but yeah, the only difference mounting wise, as you can see, the length of that upper tab is quite a bit different. So we need to make just like a little tab or something for it to bolt to. Otherwise, it's just gonna be like flopping there. The two bottom mounting points are the same though. So that's a plus. But yeah, the reason you have to use this ECU is because 350Z ECU, for the coolant temp gauge and your RPM gauge, it's reliant on the CAN network. And this ECU, or this gauge cluster, just doesn't have that functionality. So if you kept this cluster, your fuel and speed would work, but your RPM and temp wouldn't work. Along with some of the gauge cluster lights, like the cruise and check engine light, those are also reliant on the CAN bus network, which means less wires in this harness, which is why it's missing one of the plugs, because it just doesn't need as many. This is another one of the key things you need. This along with the pigtails, because like I said, you don't need the pigtails, but it helps to have them just to reference back in the service manual for the colors to which wires do what. So it helps a lot. Aside from that, the obvious part is the newer style ECU, going with this kind of connector. This is tunable with UPREV, and this has to be not tuned, but you need to have at the minimum the NATs disabled, the Nissan anti-theft system. Otherwise, this won't start. So that's the minimum thing you need. Yeah, that's all the big parts that you need. Other than that, it's just wiring it all together. All right, so as far as getting this finished up, we need to finalize some of the lengths, and then I want to try and, this is the throttle body harness and it runs back here, but I want to try and just consolidate it with this main loom over here. So I need to unwrap most of this and see if we can just simplify it a little bit. So this is the boring part. So we're just gonna start unwrapping stuff. And I have a convenient little snap-on tool specifically just for this kind of thing. Just slice up your tape. Okay, so needless to say, this is pretty tedious work and it takes like a long time. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like hard, but it's a lot of stuff to keep track of. That's the thing. Like you could easily like misread a terminal, like this particular wire needs to go on terminal 32 and you put it in 33 and all of a sudden the thing doesn't work and then you gotta backtrack a lot, and that's the pain in the ass part. But I mean, other than that, it's just like matching up functions like EGR solenoid to EGR solenoid and evap to evap, cam sensor to cam sensor. That's the biggest pain, is the cam sensors on these things, because if they read a little bit off, it won't start. And then that was the main problem that we were having at first, is we couldn't get it to start, and I kept thinking I screwed something up, but I was backtracking for like 2 days straight, checking terminals and wires and plugs, and everything was correct. And I was like, why won't you start? It turns out it's because we were trying to start it on the ECU from my Altima, which has NATs disabled, but it's tuned for my car. I don't know what the difference is. It's literally like, I mean, it's not exactly the same engine. This is a Murano engine, so it doesn't have EVT, and mine is a Maxima engine. So I guess because of that, it wouldn't start. I don't know, man, but it was driving us nuts. We finally ended up getting stock 350Z ECU and getting NATs disabled on that, and it started right up. So I'm kind of annoyed that I spent 2 days just like banging my head against the wall for no reason, but at least it works. Another issue that I kind of ran into is this harness had already been messed with, which I really don't like, but it's what we got to work with. So this one already had the older style inverters, which we had to replace with the newer style ones. And the whole thing was wrapped in this felt tape stuff, which can be kind of a pain in the areas where it gets like really hot, because it's like really like stuck together. So that was a pain, but it's just another thing to deal with. Okay, so we got the whole thing unwrapped, and the two important plugs here, well, the main important plug is the throttle body. And this one I believe is the EGR, which we don't need. So this one we're gonna end up deleting, and then we're gonna wanna tape this up along with this main bundle of wires here. And then this one still needs to end up back here somewhere. So we're gonna fold it this way, and I'm gonna tape that. And then the intake valve timing can probably come out at the same area. So we'll tape these together. And this was our ignition coil condenser, and all our inverters. I'll deal with that on the bench, I guess. Yeah, so now our throttle body comes out here, and we'll plug in right there. Got our O2 sensor and power steering pressure. Just gonna go down here so we can tape this guy in place. And that's pretty much ready, I think. And this is our ejector harness and, or no, coil harness? Coil harness and ejector harness. Yeah, so I think we're ready. Let's go ahead and take it out of the car. So I'm gonna mark these coils because it's a little annoying that we don't have them labeled. 2, 4, 6. Okay, I think we got everything unplugged. These are your two main power plugs. These are also two of the main things that you have to rewire. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but the UPREV ECU can't control the cooling fans or AC compressor directly. So these two wires that are left here are your triggers for your cooling fans. So you basically just ground these and it'll turn on the, I think that one's low and then this one's high speed. So you just ground them and that triggers the relay for the fans. So you can either run these to switches so you can do it manually, or what I did on my car is I put a DE crossover tube, which has an extra port for an older style sensor. And then I tapped that port for an MPT thread, and I used this, I forget what it's called, but it's just like, it's this little sensor that when your coolant gets to a certain temperature, the filament inside like expands or something and it closes a circuit, which is basically ground to your engine block. And that essentially, so you wire that plug to one of these wires, and when the coolant gets to whatever temperature you buy the switch for, it turns on the fan. So it's like automatic and it does it by itself. So that's one option to do it. But then the high speed one, I ran to a manual switch inside. So that way during summer, if the low speed isn't enough and the temps start to creep up a little bit, kick on the high speed and temps come back down. Or inversely, I also ran the AC trigger to the factory switch, because on the Altima it's still just a regular, you know, on-off switch. On these it's a little more complicated because it's like built into the AC amp and stuff like that. But on those it's still just a regular switch, so I just hijacked that one to ground and I just press that one like you would the regular AC switch and it turns on the compressor. But you also need to turn on the fans at the same time, so you have to turn on the compressor and then turn on the high-speed fans, and then it works just fine. So those are pretty much the only compromises. I think if you wanted to, you could also get a body control module from any, you know, 04 and up car. And if you wire the CAN bus to it and power it up, I believe that could control the fans, but it's another big module that you'd have to find a place to stick around. I think it's a decent compromise to just have, you know, a couple switches for your fans. Most race cars do anyway, so I think that's a good solution for now at least. So let's get this out of here. Yes, get stuck on every possible thing. The grounds are still bolted on. Yay! And we've got a mess here. So let's clean that up. All right. So just gotta spread this out in roughly the same position. All right, so we've got our harness laid out, and the plugs that we need to cut out that we're not gonna need are this EGR valve plug, and then this is the EGR temp sensor, I guess. We couldn't figure out what it was because it didn't plug into anything on the car, and I traced the wire back all the way to the ECU plug, and it's pin 54, which says EGR temp sensor, so we're not gonna need that. So basically, for both of these plugs, we're just gonna like trace all the wires back as far as we can, and then just either depin them or cut them off and tape them up wherever appropriate. And then this freaking mess, I need to, I don't know, I guess decide how best to bundle these up, which I guess is just gonna have to be like that. This is our coolant temp sensor, and then our throttle body is gonna need to come out right here. So yeah, I think we can tape that up. On one of the questions we got on the Facebook group was if this means that the EVT would work on the Maxima motors. So this motor is out of a Murano. It doesn't have exhaust valve timing, so that's not a concern here. But if you have a Maxima motor, I think I can get it to work. We'd basically need an ECU that could control the EVT, and the only one is pretty much the Rev Up 350Z, or I guess G35 also, ECU. So that ECU, and then we'd need the harness that plugs into all those sensors, because you have two more sensors on Rev Up engines to control the EVT. So you have your two regular ones and then the two ones on the exhaust cams. So we need the wiring for those. And then you have the actual EVT solenoid magnet things themselves. So that's two more plugs with corresponding wiring that goes all the way to the ECU. So that's a lot of extra wiring, but I think it should work, but we haven't tried it. So we'll see if anybody wants to be the guinea pig for that. All right, so that's more or less where everything needs to be. So let's figure out how to get these wires off. So I'm just gonna cut all this stuff out, and then we're just gonna start wrapping the whole harness, because all the locations are pretty much set where they need to be. So this takes a while, and yeah, it's probably gonna be pretty boring. So cue the B-roll and cue the ASMR coffee time, and throw on your favorite anime and just get to work. so we got all the wires pulled, EGR temp sensor and then EGR valve. The other two wires for this were the power, which just went to a junction, which I taped up somewhere in there. And then the ground from this one just went to one of the junctions that comes from this. So just cut that one off. And so now we're left with these wires that go to the ECU. So we just need to unpin these or depin these from the connector, which we're gonna need to take apart. So on this connector, this gray piece pops off. And then you have access to all the pins. So the EGR valve, it looks like it's gonna be pins 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these 4 pins are our EGR valve. And to depin these, this little plastic thing at the very top. And then you can pull the wire out. So do that for all 4 of these. All right, and that's our EGR wiring removed. Now for the temp sensor, you can like wiggle it. You're probably not gonna be able to see it on camera, but when you're trying to find whichever pin it is, you can pull the wire back and forth and you can see the pin move. So I can see it's this guy right here. This middle section sucks. It's like so cramped in here. So right there, we got that. So that's all of our unnecessary wires removed. Now we can start taping everything up. You're gonna put your little guard back on here. Like that. And we're good to go. All right, so we're gonna use this Tessa tape. It's like cloth tape for wiring harnesses, and just wrap this guy all the way back up. And we're gonna start where the firewall junction was. I peeled off all that potting resin as much as I could anyway, because that's the only sucky part is you have to cut all this junk off, and then you don't really have the grommet that seals against the firewall anymore. You need to find like a good solution for that. If you guys know, let me know in the comments. But we're gonna start here and just start wrapping. All right, so we're all done, got it wrapped up, and I've never used this cloth tape before, but it looks pretty nice. I usually do the regular electrical tape and that plastic loom stuff, but this ain't bad. So let's get this in the car. All right, ta-da. Now, gotta go inside and plug everything in, and it should be ready for a start. All right, so we got all our wires running here, and my God, was this a pain in the ass. This is the biggest pain of this whole project, was getting this connector in here. And I had to like take all the extra bits apart to get to slim down a bit. And then I broke part of this thing, so I had to go pillage one of my other junk harnesses. Such a pain. But now we can plug this in. That's not it. There we go. Ta-da. So that guy's gonna live right there. And we run all these guys. Actually, this one's right here. So I'll plug that guy in. Run these guys over here. So we're gonna put this ground right there. That looks pretty good. And then we got our cooling fan triggers, which are gonna get wired up somewhere. And then I wired up the AC compressor trigger here too. So these will get ran to switches to ground later when the interior's more put together. But that's pretty much it. Let's bolt these two down. All right, I think we're done. Let's throw a battery in it and see if it works. Good noises. I think we got a vacuum leak. Yeah, I might want to plug in the brake booster and the whatever that is. crankcase. We don't have a filter, so that's gonna run stupid because of that regardless, but. All right, so as you guys can see, we got our fuel gauge working and our odometer and stuff like that. That works. Obviously RPMs work. Temp gauge, you see starting to go up a little bit. I don't think there's that much coolant in it right now, but it should be fine. And then all our auxiliary lights like the door, the seat belt, e-brake, that's all functional. It's good to go. And it fits in the stock location, so. All right, so as you can see, it's not impossible. There's just a couple of compromises, which in my opinion are well worth it. Just a couple of switches for your fans and AC compressor. We're still yet to see if the AC is actually gonna work, but I mean, we can at least turn the compressor on, I know that. I know the AC is a little more complicated on these, but I think we got a good shot at getting it to work. So just to reiterate, your parts list, the minimum things that you need is gonna be an 05 and 06 Altima 3.5 harness. It could be automatic, SCR, manual preferably. You're gonna need a 350Z pedal sensor. That's if you're using a 350Z ECU. I guess the pedal sensor should depend on whatever ECU you're gonna use. We have a 350Z ECU on this one, so we have a 350Z pedal sensor. The cluster needs to be from an 04 to 06 Sentra. My car has a 2.5 Sentra ECU, and this one has an SCR, or a gauge cluster, and this one has an SCR gauge cluster. I've yet to confirm if any, like the 1.8s or 2.0 Sentras will work, but if they have a CAN bus system, it should work, because that's what your RPM and your temperature gauges work off of. That's pretty much it. I mean, other than like the plugs off of your stock Maxima harness, there's 4 interior plugs. You only need 3 of them. The 4th one's for automatic stuff, which we don't need because it's manual. And then 2 power supply plugs that are by the fuse box, like here somewhere. And that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for watching. If you guys got any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments. And remember, always do your best.